All right, welcome to week 6 for English 123. So we're getting very close to the end of the session. For last week, you're working on your first draft, your rough draft. Let's just say very rough draft. We're going to begin to polish that draft bit by bit, okay? This is the intermediary draft between your first draft and your final draft. So this is where we can begin to kind of refine things. We can begin to polish things, we can begin to reorganize things, we can begin to really try to finalize it. And remember, it's not finalized yet. We don't own it yet. We don't own it until we actually turn it in on the due date. Okay, so from this point forward, everything is still very fluid, everything is still very open game in terms of the paper. Okay, so yes, you will be graded on your first draft, yes, you will be graded on this draft, but it's more in terms of just the quality of your work. Okay, it's not so much on is it the quality of a finished product. It's are you following the instructions? Are you following the requirements of the assignment? And are you turning in your best work you can? So don't feel that it has to be perfect in the second draft. As I said in the last video, embrace the process. Go through the process. Revision is not something that just happens overnight. It's not something that just happens in a day or even a few days. It's an ongoing thing. You'll see this in even some of your other classes where your final paper is going to be the culmination of a lot of hard work, a lot of thought, not just to write the paper, but a lot of thought to actually refine it and to begin to make it as good as it possibly can. Don't settle. That's really the idea here is don't settle for just a decent paper. We want to go for a great paper. And a great paper is different for everybody. A great paper for me is a different great paper for you, is a different paper for someone who has maybe more experience, someone who maybe has written a dissertation for a PhD. So a great paper can be somewhat relative. Now, I want you to write a great paper for an undergraduate English 123 course, okay? And it's possible, it's doable. Even though you may not have much experience, it is doable to write a quality paper as a undergraduate, introductory, intermediate English 123 student, okay? So don't discount yourself, but also don't put, expectations on yourself that are beyond what they call zone of proximal development, or ZPD. You don't want to necessarily have such a high expectation on yourself or such a perfectionist attitude that it's something way beyond what your experience is, but you want to do your best. Okay. So anyway, what does that mean? Well, so the revision process, as noted in Blackboard, if you review the revision checklist, it breaks it down into 3 very simple stages. Thesis statement, and I would say these are in order of importance. Thesis statement, I take that back. They're all equally important, I should say. It's not order of importance. These are all crucial. Thesis statement, general organization, and clarity. Okay, I was going to say order of importance because thesis statement is the #1 starting point for your paper. But even if the thesis statement is great, what do you have without good organization? And even if you have good organization, what do you have without clarity? So these 3 things: thesis statement, general organization, and clarity. So thesis statement ought to be something, again, it's a claim that is arguable, that states a position, it presents an argument that includes some type of explanatory information as far as a how and a why. You're going to argue A, and you're going to argue it this way, and you're going to argue it why, because of this. Okay, so remember to include that. It's not uncommon for us to have a blunt or simplistic thesis statement, but we want to kind of strive beyond that and go with a little more elaborate, a little more complex. Not necessarily a long run-on sentence, but you want to provide some substance in your thesis statement to give some explanations to how and why you're going to argue what you're arguing. So the little paragraph here for thesis statement. Did you include a thesis statement? Is it one sentence long, not a full paragraph? Does your thesis statement tell what the plan you're going to argue, as well as how and why you're going to do it? Does your paper match what you promised the reader in your thesis? So going beyond your thesis, does everything line up with the thesis statement? So not only you want to focus on having that strong thesis, but then does everything plug into that? It has to plug into the thesis. Do you include support for all portions of your thesis? You may provide some of the how and the why, but you don't really address it in the paper. Do you address it in the paper? If not, you want to adjust the thesis statement or adjust what you've done in the paper. Okay, either include it or take it away from the thesis statement. Okay, further here, so general organization. Is there a structure that makes your writing easy for the reader to follow? Okay, this is very important. You want to have a flow through your paper from thesis statement to your first topic sentence to the supporting detail in that paragraph to the conclusion of that paragraph to the transition to the next paragraph. So everything connected, everything interlocking. One, think of Legos. If you want to, I don't know if you've most kids have had experience with Legos at some point. So think of Legos. Does everything interlock? Does everything hook in to each other? That's really what you want to look for, is this cohesive, unified structure from point A to point B to point C. And all of you that turned in your proposal, you did provide some type of structure in that outline. So you may add to that outline, you may edit that outline. It just depends on where you want to go with it. But generally speaking, most of you who turned that in did great. Okay. So you want to follow your outline structure. You want to make sure your topic sentences are right there, plugged into your thesis statement, that everything is line upon line, building block on building block. Okay. It's all flowed. Another way to look at it is you can think of the thesis being a thread, right? And each paragraph having some sort of ring or even like an eye of a needle. And that thesis statement is being woven through every paragraph. Everything in the paper should correlate with that thesis statement. So the thread or the yarn is woven all through that paper from top to bottom, okay? From start to finish, from introduction to conclusion. The thesis statement is woven in there, and your structure is clear and flows from one point to the next. When you have a gap in your logic, when you have a gap in the progression of thought in your paper, it causes confusion. It makes the reader think, did I miss something? Did I overlook something? Did I not read something? Because let's really be honest, reading, it's challenging to read. It's challenging not so much to read and understand, but it's challenging to really follow what someone is going to say when you're dealing with complex ideas, when you're dealing with arguments, okay? It's not uncommon to have to read something 2 or 3 times to really get a real clear understanding of what the writer is saying. So we have to be honest with how writing can become an obstacle at times to what we're actually trying to accomplish. Our own writing itself could prevent the reader from really understanding. So we know what we're trying to say, we know what we want to say, but is the reader understanding that? Is the flow of thought in our minds, that we put on paper, is it flowing from one point to the next? Okay, I think that makes sense. So you want to look for that transition of ideas, transition of thought through your paper. Do your ideas flow smoothly from one thought to the next? Have you considered adding headings within your paper to help the reader understand? Now, if you're using MLA or APA, there is instructions on how to use headings. They do work well. They do provide clarity for the reader. You may consider using that. It's up to you. They're in the style manual if you want to incorporate that. Most students don't. It's not very common in MLA. It's very common in APA. So if you're using APA, I would strongly recommend using it. If you're using MLA, it's hardly ever used, but it's always, I've noticed with MLA, when it is used, it works well. So it may be something for everyone to really highly consider using. And it just helps the reader, which is me, and it helps any other reader that might read your paper and in your editing and revision to really understand the paper. The reader must understand what you're writing. Okay, have you included transition words? Okay, if you remember the PowerPoint that I included a while back, it gives some instruction on transitions. There's, additionally, therefore, thus, these types of words help connect thoughts. It wouldn't be a bad idea maybe to look on Purdue OWL. Take some time, take maybe 10-15 minutes to look up on Purdue OWL transitional phrases, and it will give you a real good idea of the cues that you can use to use for transitions. For example, is a great transitional phrase, transitional cue. Don't overuse it. You don't want to repetitively have the same transitional cue over and over again. For example, or in addition to, additionally. So use some variety in that, but it really does help the reader see how things connect together. Those are connective words. Ideally, transitions take place from one paragraph to the next. It's usually the first dependent clause within the beginning of the paragraph. So you could say, in addition to what you've stated previously in the prior paragraph, in addition to this, there is this. Or in addition to that, there is this. So you're kind of having to refer back to move forward. Okay, so look at your paragraphs. Look at the beginning sentence, the beginning phrase, the first dependent clause of the first sentence of your paragraphs to see if it's looking back. It's what's been said. Okay, that's the easiest way to build transitions, to connect thoughts together. You can do that within paragraphs. You can say, on one hand there's this, yet on the other there is this. What other? Furthermore is also a good way of putting it. Furthermore, comma, when you're trying to build on something that you've said previously. Furthermore, not only is this, but there's also that. So there's different ways of using transitional phrases or transitional cues. I would look that up either through our manual, through our textbook, through Purdue OWL. I would say Google it, but I think Purdue OWL provides one of the most trustworthy sources for these types of, looking up what is a transition. In fact, on the next video, we're going to talk about sentence variety and sentence types, and I'm going to refer you to Purdue OWL to kind of read a brief article that they have, and you'll be able to add some variety to your revision and on the sentence level. But anyway, let's move on. So we want to make sure that our transitions are working. In fact, I overlooked here, even within the revision checklist, here is a list of transitional words that you can use. So I would definitely use that. You can maybe look up the usage of how they are actually being used, but these are definitely the ones you want to incorporate in your writing. They will make it much clearer. They'll make it much more organized. They'll make it much more connected and cohesive and coherent. Those are the things that we are striving for in our paper: is consistency, coherency, and what's the other C word? Consistency, coherency, and comprehension. And one would be comprehensible to the reader, understandable. Okay, so clarity. That all ties into clarity. So clarity for me is one of the most important things in a paper. Is the paper clear? Does the paper make sense? Is what you're saying, does it make sense? And really, what happens when we lack clarity or when we have clarity issues, it's because we're getting words mixed up with one another. We're getting our sentence structures mixed up, or our sentence structure in one sentence. And so you may see notes where it says sentence needs clarity, sentence needs clarity. What that is telling you is that there's some vagueness in the writing. It needs to be more clear. And clarity usually suffers when there's a conflict between the subject and the predicate of the sentence. Okay, so if you remember, subject is the noun, predicate is the verb, And usually when we don't know what the subject is doing and what type of action is taking place and how that subject and action are correlating with one another, it begins to become unclear. How does that work? Or if we string too many verbs together within a sentence, it becomes what is the main verb? So then there's clarity issue of what the main verb is. There's maybe what is the subject? You have a subject, but then you refer to the subject by a pronoun, but there's also another, there's an object in the sentence that's receiving that action, and then you refer to them by a pronoun as well. So who's the pronoun really referring to? And that can be a clarity issue. So you want to think about what's the subject and the predicate? How are they working? How are they functioning? How are your adjectives describing? How are your adverbs describing? Those are important things to think about. You would think that parts of speech, oh, we already learned that, but parts of speech, when they get kind of thrown together, they really do affect clarity. So the most effective clarity is the subject, okay, is doing the action, okay? The closer you get to that, the more clarity you have. Now, you have a very simple sentence, you know, um, the professor teaches composition. The professor is a subject, teaches is the verb, composition is what's being taught. So then you can add in other phrases and other terms to describe how the professor is teaching composition, different types of adjectives, different types of adverbs, different types of prepositions, where the direction is happening. Where is it? Is it in, out, up, down, through, and so prepositions are important, adjectives are important, adverbs are important. All these types of parts of speech affect clarity. So in the next video, I'm going to hopefully discuss sentence variety and how dependent and independent clauses work together to help the clarity of your sentences and help the clarity of what you're saying and give you variety in what you're saying and help you to articulate. Okay, so we're going to talk about articulation in the next video. So just to really clarify further here, your revision process, you want to follow this checklist, thinking of thesis statement, general organization. How are your paragraphs structured? How are your paragraphs working together? Do you need to maybe rearrange some paragraphs to make the clarity and to make the flow of thought more clear? Do you need to reorganize the thesis statement maybe to make it structured better to fit the structure of your paper? So you want to now begin reading your paper critically and think in terms of how these three things are functioning within your essay. Okay. There's other things to think about as well. There's other things to work on, but I think these are the three most important things right now for this second draft. For your third draft, then you'll get into more detailed revisions, but right now just those three. Okay. In addition to that, of course, there's editing in terms of you're using a possessive instead of a plural. Are you using the punctuation correctly? Are you using is your usage and your punctuation, are they correct? Those types of things. So the little tiny editing is what's going to come at the very end, but this is really the higher level revision process. So continue writing, continue thinking critically, continue considering what you're trying to say. And you may need to, I'm going to encourage you, you may need to become a little more philosophical about your paper and about what you're arguing. And sometimes some people can be resistant to becoming or thinking philosophically. But at this point, I think it's really beneficial for you to begin to think philosophically about your paper, begin to throw questions at your paper. How am I communicating here? Communication is number one. So how am I communicating? Am I communicating effectively? Am I really saying what I need to say and saying it how I need to say it to make the reader understand it? So if you have any questions, as always, please email me, and I'll, of course, do my best to direct you being successful in your writing. All right, so check the next video for the rest of the lecture. Okay, thank you.